Hi. I want to start with a personal note about what I'm wearing. You may have noticed that I'm not wearing a suit coat most of the time, or certainly not a tie. And there's a very good reason. I live in Corpus Christi, Texas, deep South Texas, and it's July. And it is brutally hot in our area. Today it's going to be 97 with about 100% humidity. And even though my office where we do these recordings is air conditioned, I have to go out all the time. So we have adopted a much more casual and sensible dress in South Texas. I hope it doesn't dissuade you from the fact that what I talk about in these lectures is real history and worthwhile listening to, I hope. Now, let's go back and remember something about World War I. World War I ended in 1918. America became very disillusioned and hurt by its one-year participation in World War I. Woodrow Wilson had promised that this was the war to end all wars. But the cost was amazingly high. It was a brutal, bloody conflict. The carnage of so-called Flanders fields and the revelations of the unsavory political manifestations and machinations of the armaments industry and of the European colonial powers just did not sit well with Americans. But even more than the mega macro interests, the death toll was something that was horrible. John McCrae, who was a Canadian medical officer at the Battle of Ypres in Belgium, wrote a poem. And one stanza of that, one very short stanza of that, will be sufficient to convey the overwhelming sense of disgust and sadness that permeated the American people. Here's what he wrote. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Millions of young men died. And as a result of the war, I don't think it's too much to say that America became something of a contradiction. On the one side, there was an artificial gaiety of the 1920s, the Roaring '20s, the Great Gatsby, those kinds of manifestations where people almost artificially were happy, joyous, and threw caution to the wind. And then on the other side, a streak of straight-laced Puritanism, Protestant evangelical faith that culminated in prohibition, xenophobia, that is the hatred of foreigners, and isolationism. Now, these tendencies have been around for a while, but the impact of World War I intensified them. Among the malignancies that emerged is a much more virulent expression of anti-Semitism. Now let's be clear. There had always been some people in America who didn't like Jews. But now this movement became open, popular, and even acceptable in some circles. I want to give you 5 evidences or examples of this. Now, one of them we already talked about a little bit, and that's the Red Scare. Beginning with the Communist Revolution of 1917-1918, Americans feared that their version of individualistic capitalism was at risk. They were particularly concerned with what was called a Judeo-Communist conspiracy since a number of prominent communists had been Jews. Now, that should not surprise us. Communism in Russia was one of the half a dozen or so movements that opposed the Tsar. And for a people that had been oppressed and persecuted by Tsarist Russia, almost any alternative was preferable. And so the fact that Jews were socialists and communists and other movements was a most natural kind of thing in opposing the Tsarist regime. You would expect that to happen. The second thing that you might want to remember is that during the 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan, which had fallen into almost quiescence, was now revitalized. Across the South, the ugliness of the Klan reemerged. But, and this is really important, it also made major inroads in the North, especially in the state of Indiana. By the middle of the 1920s, as many as 250,000 men in Indiana, about 1/3 of the population of men, were members of the KKK. The governor, Edward L. Jackson, was a prominent Klansman. The majority of both houses of the legislature in Indiana were Klan affiliates. And what was their platform? Their platform was very simple. Christianity plus patriotism. Those two things together. In 1922, the Klan celebrated Klan Day, and it did so every year after that. And what did they do? At night they burned crosses at the State Fair of Indiana. And in Indiana, at least, very little of political consequence happened without Klan approval. And here's somebody you may not know about. Gerald L.K. Smith. Smith was a Protestant minister who became increasingly enamored of European fascism, and he led a lifetime of battles against communism, liberalism, organized labor, and Jews. As late as 1956, he ran for president of the United States under the banner of the fringe party from the right, the Christian Nationalist Party. He sponsored a passion play, that is the last few days of Jesus' life, in a town called Eureka Springs, Arkansas. And it was, he said, I quote, the only presentation of its kind in the world which has not diluted the content in order to flatter Jewish Christ haters. Among his more notable views, he maintained that Jesus was not Jewish but a Gentile whom Jews had crucified. That Presidents Roosevelt, Truman, and Eisenhower were all Jews. That Hitler was a Bolshevik and a tool of a Jewish cabal. That Jews invented communism, and that the civil rights movement was a Jewish conspiracy to destabilize America. That's Gerald L.K. Smith. Yes, he's on the fringe, but the fringe moved a large part of the American population. Now, I've already mentioned to you Father Charles Coughlin. Coughlin was a Catholic priest at the Shrine of the Little Flower near Detroit. He served there from 1928 until 1966, and he was one of America's most popular radio personalities. At his peak, he had a weekly audience of about 3.5 million people. And remember that in the 1930s, there were relatively few alternative forms of entertainment and amusement. And so people listened to the radio a lot. And you have images of a family gathering around the one radio in the house and listening carefully. After 1938, his party, the Christian Front, became a mouthpiece for not only European fascism, but for Nazism. Threats to America were always perceived as part of a Jewish conspiracy in the world. When America was attacked in 1941 by the Japanese and then went to war against the Germans in 1942, the Bishop of Detroit finally silenced him as someone who could be tried for aiding the enemy. But it's important to note that the bishop did not silence him because he was anti-Semitic. The bishop simply didn't want this un-American activity going on under Catholic auspices. And finally, let's talk about the German-American Bund, B-U-N-D, also known as the American Nazi Party. Until the outbreak of World War II, the Bund staged large pro-Nazi rallies, including at Madison Square Garden in New York. They imported Nazi speakers, and they ran a series of summer camps for kids. Among the most famous supporters of the Bund was a man who really had no German connection, but was fond of fascism, and that was Charles Lindbergh, who was about as heroic a figure in American history at that time as you could have. Now, we've already talked about Jewish organizations that tried to counter this kind of propaganda and anti-Semitism. There was, however, some ambivalence in the American Jewish community about how forcefully and how publicly to react. And we've talked about Jacob Schiff and his friends in New York who wanted to do quiet diplomacy, but they were not the only ones who were concerned. A large part of the American population were children of immigrants or immigrants themselves, and they were somewhat insecure about their position in American society. If they spoke out too forcefully, is it possible that they would be branded as disloyal, as traitors? Could they be sent home? They were afraid. They had had such experiences in the recent past in Europe. Now, when Hitler came to power in 1933, it's estimated that there were about 523,000 Jews in Germany. In 1935, 2 years later, the Nazi government of Germany adopted the Nuremberg Laws, revoking Jewish citizenship and rights. And then in 1939, there was a pogrom called Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass. During this period, a little bit more than half, about 54% of all the Jews in Germany left Germany. That's around 282,000. Many of these immigrants went to nearby European lands, France, some went to Spain, some went to England. They went wherever they could get in. And in some places, they were subsequently captured and killed, especially in France, where the Vichy government helped the Nazis round up Jews from other countries and send them back. Some found refuge in Palestine or in Great Britain, in Central and South America. There are colonies of Jews in Mexico, for example, and elsewhere, Uruguay, Brazil. But relatively few were able to enter the United States unless they already had relatives in the States who could sponsor them as immigrants. Now, why was America reluctant to save the lives of these people, these refugees? Well, I'm going to give you about 6 reasons. The first is isolationism. America had gone through this turmoil of World War I, which was, as I said, Wilson's phrase was the war to end all wars, and yet here was Germany rearming itself. We didn't want to have anything to do with that. We didn't want any foreign entanglements, to use the phrase from Washington's farewell address. We didn't want to be connected or involved with a European controversy again. We had, after all, two oceans, one on the Atlantic side, one on the Pacific side. This was going to protect us. And so they tried very hard, lots of Americans tried hard to avoid getting involved. We rejected, in 1922, the League of Nations. We were one of the major countries that would not sign on. And this was a blow to Wilson's concept of diplomacy. Shortly after that, the Congress passed a series of neutrality acts, which said that we were not permitted to do business with European powers that were in conflict. Now, we didn't stay neutral with regard to Latin America and South America, but at least with regard to the Axis powers, Japan, Italy, and Germany, we were to stay out of it. That's one. The second thing is that there was still this remarkable bigotry and widespread dislike and distrust of Jews. The Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith did a survey from time to time about attitudes, and well over half of the American population said they didn't like Jews or didn't trust them. So why would we bring more of them into the country? The third reason is that saving these immigrants was not at this point seen as a moral imperative. Nobody knew about Nazi killing centers until about 1943 or so. There was an internment camp called Dachau outside of Munich, but it was simply a place to hold political prisoners for temporary. People got released from there. It wasn't that bad. It was just a prison. And so America could be neglectful about what was really happening. And of course, Germany did not invade Poland until the 1940s, and that's when most Jews lived. Then there was, number 4, a fear that immigrants would take American jobs. We had just gone through, or we were about to go through, the Depression, where millions of Americans had a very, very tough time supporting themselves and their families. And we didn't need, or at least many people thought we didn't need, more workers who would be taking lower paid jobs and taking jobs away from Americans. There were domestic priorities that had to take precedence. And so the idea was, let Europe fend for itself. We've got our own business, we've got our own problems, we'll do it ourselves. Then there was the fear, number 5, that Nazi spies would be embedded in the immigration flow. And in fact, there were a few occasions where Nazi spies did come in, and of course the German-American Bund was very adamantly pro-Hitler, so that was a good example of what might happen if we let in these German refugees. They'll be dangerous. And finally, Franklin Roosevelt, who was the president, who had a reasonably internationalist outlook, had a political problem. There were a large number of people in Congress and in the country who did not want him in any way to help the combatants, especially England, and there was a huge fight about what he called Lend-Lease, where we would send sometimes surplus military equipment to England to aid it. he also had to worry about the 1940 election and his re-election as president. And he did not want to alienate all of these folks. Now, what do we do about refugees? One thing that America did, along with 31 other nations, is to gather at a French resort called Evian-les-Bains, Evian, E-V-I-A-N, on the southern shore of the Lake Léman, or Lake Geneva, and to have a conference about what to do about refugees. There was an agreement reached at this conference that countries would accept a limited number of refugees. Great Britain especially took children. And there is something called the Kindertransport, where the transportation or sending over of young Jewish children to England, where they were placed in foster homes and in group homes for the duration of the war. About 20,000 German Jews and other Jews from Poland made it to Shanghai in China. A number went to Central and South America. America did not take any Jews, but there was a lot of talk. Now, the Evian conference turned out to be a massive public relations victory for Germany, because they could then say, look, the countries of the world are not being hospitable. They talk a good game, but when the chips are down, they won't take these folks. They're a bunch of hypocrites. And that was proved even more with an occasion called the St. Louis Affair. The St. Louis was a ship owned by the Hamburg American Line. And in the spring of 1939, about 937, I think, Jews boarded this ship. They had what they thought were legitimate passports and entry visas for Cuba. So the ship went from Hamburg in northern Germany all the way across the Atlantic and anchored in Havana Harbor. Emissaries from the ship went ashore and said, we have these people, and they're ready to come ashore. The Cubans said, no, those are phony visas. The ship rode at anchor in the hot sun of Havana. Now, it's May or June, and for 30 days, people couldn't get off the boat. They tried, they couldn't get off. Sometimes their relatives would come out in small boats and talk to them from the boat to the ship. Eventually, the Germans said, we'd like our ship back. Send it back. And so the ship weighed anchor, went north, went so close to the United States that they could see the lights of Miami. But all of the efforts of Jewish people, Jewish executives, to get them admitted somewhere, Panama, Cuba, the United States, somewhere, were to no avail. The ship ended up docking first in Cherbourg, and then in Southampton in England, and eventually in Rotterdam, and finally in Hamburg. People got off at each place. The only survivors of the ship are really the ones who got off in England. The rest of them were eventually captured by the Nazis as they rampaged through Europe and were killed. Now, there is a theory about St. Louis. And I tell you that very honestly, nobody could prove this. But the theory is that the Germans actively wanted to see what would happen if they sent a boatload of refugees to the free world, so-called free world, and found out what the reaction would be. And when they found out that the free world was not prepared to accept these folks, they felt freed of any limitations, and they could then consider the final solution, because they knew that America and other countries would really not lift a finger to stop him. One more person that you need to know about. His name is Breckinridge Long, L-O-N-G. Breckinridge Long was a personal friend of Franklin Roosevelt. And when Roosevelt came into power as president, he made Breckinridge Long the Assistant Secretary of State with a particular charge over immigration. He was a prominent obstructionist. He's a really good example of the kind of anti-Semitic person embedded in the administration. He did whatever he could do to block Jewish immigration into this country. He made it very difficult to apply for a visa and insisted that the quota be reduced. About 300,000 Jews applied to have entry in the United States. The quota was a little bit more than 27,000 each year. In other words, it would take about 11 or 12 years just to exhaust this particular quota. Long cloaked his objections in the language of security, but in doing so, he reduced the humanitarian concerns to virtually none. During his tenure, 90% of the quotas from outside the United States were not filled. About 190,000 Jews died because of this. Finally, in 1943, the Secretary of the Treasury, Henry Morgenthau, who was Jewish and who was a friend of Roosevelt, produced a report uncovering Long's machinations and how he tried very hard, sometimes with lies, to prevent people from coming into this country. Long was actually called at one point the American Eichmann. And Morgenthau managed to circumvent him. Roosevelt was forced to create something called the War Refugee Board in 1944. And they admitted a small number, just slightly under 1,000 refugees, to a former military camp in Oswego, New York. The idea was they would come temporarily until the war was over and they could go home. Well, they ended up staying here. The President's Advisory Committee on Political Refugees was able to admit a few people who were prominent religious and intellectual figures under special dispensation. Mostly, it was not very effective. Let's conclude. The record of American anti-Semitism during the 1920s and 30s strikes us as shocking today. It was certainly not one of the highlights of American ethical and moral courage, but it reflects the reality of what was going on in this country before and into the early days of World War II.